Okay, are we ready? How's everyone feeling? Okay, so I can feel a new energy in the room. This is good. Raise your hands if you made a new friend in the past hour. Whoa, that's wonderful. Okay. That's really heartening to see. Okay. No wonder there's a new energy. So, we're now about to move into our first panel, which, and the session that you just had will be an ideal foundation to listen to what your panelists are going to say. But before that, just two updates from the social media spheres. We have a digital media zone set up near the registration table, and we invite you to take your picture and share it on Twitter, Facebook using our hashtags, and we will select the 10 best images with the DMC backdrop at the end of the day and announce the prizes around 6 p.m. So stick around, take photos, tweet, and use hashtags because we have some exciting prizes. And we also want to acknowledge folks from the country offices. We have country office watch parties with some as large as 80 people watching us right now in Ghana, Turkey, Botswana, Liberia, Malawi. We also have folks tuning in from Saudi Arabia, Uganda, Kenya, Cameroon, Burundi, and Senegal. So thank you all. Look at the cameras. Thank you. It's so great to have you tuning in. We need you here as well. And now to further fuel all this thinking and the new friendships, we move into the first panel. And as you know, at the core of any smart city or any city are its residents, especially young residents. And they're not merely recipients of services, they should be actively engaged. And our panelists this morning will share their vision of the use of data and smart solutions to engage with and better serve citizens like each of you while discussing some of the implications that come with it. We heard some of them this morning. They will touch on it further. And moderating our panel this morning will be Eleanor Robbins, the investment officer focusing on advisory services and investments in cities for the World Bank's International Finance Corporation.
Please. Good morning, everybody. Please. So, urban populations are growing in size. They're also growing in density and diversity, and in many places in the world in levels of inequality. In this context, many cities are turning to digital services to improve the quality of public service delivery and also the access to public services. So with this new technology comes obviously huge opportunities, but also challenges. And today we're going to talk about how new technology services can be used to further citizen engagement and promote inclusiveness. It's a big question that we'll try and tackle today in just 45 minutes, but a very interesting one, and I hope you'll think so too. Here in DC today, where we're all sitting, we have lots of new urban transport apps. There are electric bikes, there are scooters, there are electric vehicles, but I've noticed that we can't necessarily access them in the same way depending on which area of the city that we're in. So it speaks to today's theme, and I think it's a relevant one for every city in the world. I'm really honored today to welcome the esteemed panel we have up on the stage. Directly to my left, Magdi Amin is the investment partner at Omidyar Network, where he's on external service actually from the World Bank Group. Mara Balestrini is the CEO of an innovation agency called Ideas for Change. She's also co-founder of Salus Corp, which is a cooperative for healthcare data in Spain, and wears many other hats, which she'll touch on. And Nkechi Koka is program manager for the GovTech program at Code for Africa, which is Africa's largest civic technology initiative. And we had one other member, Nigel Jacob, who works in the Boston Mayor's office, who unfortunately wasn't able to make it today who had a family emergency. So if I could ask perhaps each of the speakers to give a brief overview of what your organization does, and then we'll get into the heart of the discussion.
Hello, everyone. It's really exciting to be here. Thank you to the World Bank, and thank you to everyone who have come down here. So I'm Nkechi Koka. I'm from Nigeria. I live in Cape Town. I work as the program manager for Code for Africa. Code for Africa is a non-profit organization, a civic technology organization. And what we do is to try to give citizens actionable information. What does this mean? It means we take data and information and make it usable for citizens. So we engage with government, we engage with civil societies, with journalists, with entrepreneurs, and enthusiasts, people who are interested in how they can take data and use it to engage government in a better way. And also we work with governments to see how we can get them to deliver services the way we want, to get them to be more transparent, to be more accountable, and to produce data that citizens can use. And then we help citizens as well to understand how to utilize this data. Then we work with information technologies and intermediaries, which is the civil society, the journalists and people, researchers as well, who can take this information and get into a way which can be as simple as giving out a news in local languages or producing an article or creating a solution or a technology solution that can help to improve livabilities among citizens. So I'm really excited to be here, and I'm sure this is a beautiful panel, and then we'll learn more about what we do. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I am Mara Balestrini. At Ideas for Change, we do many things. But what is relevant here is our work in the field of smart cities, obviously. We work with different city councils to create strategies for them to be able to develop technologies with people at the center. So, for example, we work with the City Council of Bristol in the UK to create the Bristol approach, which is a smart city framework that starts with people's needs and then conceptualizes the idea of data as a commons. How can citizens produce data and share the data for the public good in a way that is safe? We also work with the City Council of Barcelona and many other city councils. And most importantly, we have a number of European projects specifically looking at citizen science, that is, how citizens can produce data and use this data to co-create knowledge that is useful for society as a whole. We have, for example, the Denosis project, which runs 10 pilots on odor sensing in different cities. We have Cities Health, which is about monitoring air pollution, noise pollution, and its effects on human health in 5 different cities. We have another one called We Count, which is citizens counting traffic, using these open source technologies to count traffic and find a relationship between vehicle traffic and air quality. So all in all, we're working very, very intensely in the intersection between data systems and civic engagement, and obviously also looking at data privacy and data governance. And at night, I am a scholar in my free time at night and during the weekends. I'm a scholar in the field of human-computer interaction, so I'm very interested in how we design systems so that people can actually make sense of technology and use them in a way that is meaningful.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you, Eleanor, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the District of Champions. That's what DC is. We have we've got the Nats and the Wizard, not the Wizards, no, I'm sorry.
Not yet, maybe next.
Maybe next year is of Sparks, and of course the Caps, so hockey, women's basketball, baseball, and of course the Super Eagles, and we can't forget Barcelona. So we've got a lot going on this panel on the football front. So I'm Magdi Amin. I'm from Omidyar Network. We're a social impact, or mission-oriented impact fund. We invest both on the for-profit side and early stage technology, typically seed or early or A rounds around the theme of technology or beneficial technology, particularly that relates to privacy and security. On the nonprofit side, I lead our work in Africa around digital identity, which is it's just an enabler of people's engagement with the online world. But also, there's about 1 billion people around the world who don't have any form of documentation. And when they lack that documentation, it limits their access to all manner of services, education and health and travel. And digital systems can be a way of providing more quickly access to those services by providing them a digital ID. Now, we've looked at these systems around the world, and we have a normative view that if systems should be done, technology should be delivered, it should be done in a way that's ethical, it's people-driven. We have the notion of good ID, good digital identity, that is, first puts people first, it's about inclusion, but also focuses a lot on user empowerment and agency, security, and privacy in order to build trust. Systems that aren't trusted aren't really going to be delivering those benefits. So we try to build those ideas and advocate through them by investing in organizations, particularly in Africa. It's just Smart Africa, UN Economic Commission, Lawyers Hub, Paradigm, a few others that we can talk about. So very glad to be here.
Thank you. Thanks, Magdi. And myself, I'm an investment officer at IFC. IFC is the commercial arm of the World Bank Group. We also do many things, but in the city space, we have a program where we work with cities across the world, and we've invested about $1.5 billion in 34 cities in emerging markets to basically support them in meeting whatever challenges they may have. It can be in any type of infrastructure subsector, waste, energy efficiency, traffic and urban transport. Smart cities is a theme that we're seeing come up more and more amongst our mayor clients. And so I'm part of that unit that looks at providing these solutions. And we typically look to provide a combination of capital, so through lending, for instance, to cities, but also other products such as guarantees. And we also provide some technical support, technical solutions, which we call our advisory services, where we help cities think through how to solve challenges and meet the needs of their populations. We recently, and I know Mara was there too, IFC and the World Bank hosted a co-creation workshop with a long-standing client of ours, the city of Izmir in Turkey, back in Barcelona at the Smart Cities Expo, World Expo. It's one of the biggest annual events on smart cities in the world, which happened just a few weeks ago. And really the top of the agenda for the mayor of Izmir was how can I reach all of the citizens in my city, and how can I deliver services to everybody and harness the digitalization that I'm seeing to better serve the population. So really a key theme. And just recently, IFC also signed an agreement with the city of Zaporizhia, which is in Ukraine, to support them in implementing smarter traffic systems, as well as energy efficiency. So just to give you a bit of a flavor also of what I do and what IFC does in this important space. So there'll be some time also for Q&A at the end of the session. I want to give you a heads up so you can start thinking about the questions. I'm sure you already have many just from these introductory remarks. So we'll leave a bit of time for that at the end. Now to perhaps just jump into the discussion, I'd like to start talking about what are ways that cities can think to really empower vulnerable citizens in particular, to empower them in the context by leveraging smart technology and digital services, particularly in a context where there is a digital divide and not all citizens may have access to data or even to the internet. I was just reading last night that in the EU, apparently close to 1/3 of the population does not look at internet on a daily basis. So there shouldn't be an assumption that kind of internet means access to all. So perhaps Nkochi, we can talk. We start from your perspective on this matter.
Okay. So at the intersection of smart city is data, technology, and people, right? And then the government, private sectors coming together to make a city that works for people. And like you said, there's always a divide. When people are growing, the cities are improving, urbanization is taking place, and then some people are left behind. So how do you, while building the cities, see to it that you capture these vulnerable communities. So this is something I think everyone is still learning about. I don't think anyone has solved the problem yet, but there are different ways when you go across the world that you can approach this. And for us back in Africa, we still are learning on the technology growth, right? We've not gotten to where we want to be. We're still, a lot of the countries are still considered as developing countries. And for example, in Nigeria, there's this, in Lagos, which is the largest city in Africa, and is also considered to be the fastest growing city in Africa, and also is the most populated city in Africa, right? So you can imagine the kind of urbanization that takes place, and people even refer to Lagos as the New York of Africa, you know? So you should expect that a lot of innovation should happen there, a lot of growth should happen there, which is happening. But at the same time, we see that as this growth is taking place, some people are really left behind. Recently, as recent as 2 months ago, we were thinking Code for Africa. There's this particular city which is called Makoko. And Lagos has the longest bridge in Africa as well. And in Lagos, for you to go from probably the airport into the main city, you have to cross through this bridge. And just by this bridge, you have this community that is of about 300,000 population living on water, right? And the city is not on the map. So there's a lot of development happening, a lot of big companies just beside the city, and yet they are not included. No electrification. The road is water roads. They use canoe to sell their goods and services, and if you go into the city, there's no school. I think we found out there are about 3 schools or 4 schools. And for people to go to secondary school, which is high school, you have to leave the city through water, which is quite dangerous, and then come back at night in order to get basic education. So this is a city that's been left out. And on the map, you can't find it. It's not existent, right? And so we're thinking, you can have this kind of urban development without including a whole 300,000 population into, planning. So what we did really was to reach out to people we knew. We didn't just think of, what is government doing? What is the private sector doing? Rather, we were thinking of what can we do as citizens. So to empower vulnerable communities is not just enough to wait for government to plan, and especially in countries in Africa where we are still developing. I think we've gotten to a point where we have to come together and government can't do it alone. We have to come together, reach out to networks, and come to see how we can contribute to helping getting these vulnerable communities, getting their voices heard in places where decisions are being made. So back to the story, what we did was to reach out to the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap, reach out to African Drone Community, which is a startup being incubated by Code for Africa, and with very little funding, we brought them in. Let's see how we can map this community, right? We spoke to the elders within the community, we reached out to the schools, picked some girls, trained them on how to develop as simple as open data kits, which is a mobile collection tool. And then we got our guys from Kenya who knew how to fly drones, come into the country. And what were we trying to do was, let us put the city on the map, let us amplify their voice, let's get data. Data is not available. Truly, people don't know what's going on in there. And the best thing you can do, for me, I think the best way you can communicate, especially from the government to citizens, is by transparency, giving citizens data to include them in development, to leverage in creating new businesses, in advocacy for civil society, in telling stories of vulnerable people for journalists. So what we did was to map and create a map, put the city on the map, amplify your voices, talk about what is going in there, and work with civil society organizations and people who deal with vulnerable communities. And then we train them, not just using technology to capture information, but we train them to utilize this data we've produced to tell better stories or to create something meaningful for the system. So this is just like an example of one of the ways in which we step in as a civil society organization or a civil tech organization. We step in to see how we can help them. So it's quite challenging, and for us, this is a bold step, and we are hoping to improve on this. And lastly, there's also another project which we worked on was equality. So if you're from Africa, you would know that there's not a lot of knowledge about air quality, air pollution issues. And we know, according to WHO, about 7 million people die yearly from air pollution-related diseases, and people don't know. This city I'm talking about, if you look at it from a distance, all you see is black clouds all over it. Stoves, cooking stoves, people are burning wood to survive and not realizing how detrimental this is to their health. So what did we do as an organization and as individuals? We decided to partner with some companies to see how citizens can now host their own air quality monitoring devices, taking into consideration the limitations we have locally, like no lights, we have little electrification, we have poor internet connectivity in those areas, and then also knowledge. People are not literate enough to understand. So this is us coming from the civic part and intervening in this issues. So and for me, empowering, like I said, empowering these vulnerable communities is us stepping in as well, not just depending on government, depending on private sector, but coming together as a community, having a collective effort. For example, you're hearing something about digital ID, you're hearing something about technology that's being used in Barcelona, coming together and saying, there's this problem that exists, there's this city that's been left behind, there's this community I want to help, and everyone coming together to work to see how we can leverage whatever skill and opportunities around us to see how we can lift those communities out of whatever vulnerabilities they face.
Yeah, thanks, Nkechi. So clearly, it takes a very kind of deliberate and intentional approach from different partners within civil society, rather than just kind of expecting that naturally everybody would be reached. So some great illustrations there. Mara, do you have any thoughts on this topic of kind of digital access and divide?
Yes, I absolutely agree with everything that's been said here. But to me, there are 2 or 3 components that are super necessary. The first one is that people will engage, people will participate only when the program or the initiative is aimed at solving a problem that they have. So sometimes we're used to seeing the technology-first approach where the government wants to solve something and it just creates a tender and it contracts technology companies, but people feel like that's not solving a problem that they feel that needs to be solved. So that really deters people from participation. So the first thing, for example, in our Bristol approach, in our model that we created for Bristol, the first part of the program is before you create anything, just because you can do it, because you have the technology, what you do is you identify matters of concern. Matters of concern are issues that bring people together, like pollution in a certain area or a lack of access to transportation in a specific neighborhood. And then only then you attract people to participate, because people want to solve that issue. And then they'll make sense of technology, and they need, the second thing, to receive training so that they can make sense of the technology and have an active participation that is meaningful in co-creating these technologies. And the last thing is that something that I started to do a while ago is to lower the barrier of entry to participation. So for many years I have been working with digital sensors, and obviously you can't roll out thousands of sensors with people. A, because it's super expensive, and 2, because is that even sustainable? Like, can I make the argument that I want my city to be more sustainable and roll out thousands of an electrochemical sensor for air quality will last 6 months. After 6 months, you need to replace it. So that's a lot of waste that we're creating. So we identified a method to measure air quality using strawberry plants. And so we're testing this method currently in a number of cities in Spain. This method was initially tested in Flanders, in Belgium. And obviously what it does is that we can bring in way more people into the discussion about air quality, because anybody wants to host a strawberry plant at home. So basically by putting the strawberry plant in the balcony, 3 months later, all these particles in the air will land on the leaves, and you cut 3 leaves, you put them in an envelope, send it to us, and we use a system called biomagnetization, which sends a magnetic pulse on the leaf, and then the particles in the air have metallic compounds, and they become magnetized, and now we can see them. And by geolocating where the strawberry plants were, we can create a 3D map of air quality at very low cost, without bringing more green into the city, and without producing more pollution. And that sort of strategy brings people on board much easily and starts a large-scale conversation about topics such as air quality, which can be somehow abstract for many people.
Yeah, no, I love this idea of really starting from what are the needs of the citizens and what do people, what's at the top of people's minds, and then looking at what solutions may be the most appropriate. And I love that strawberry plants, that solution. And when we're here talking about technology, that's great. I hope DC signs up for this program. Magdi, I'd love to hear your thoughts about, I know you work with both the public side, but also private companies. I'd love to hear your thoughts about what roles you think, so both governments, but also private investors can play in helping these services, technology services and digital services, really put the citizen at the center and be more inclusive.
That's a great question, and I love the strawberry example, Mara. My family would be eating all the strawberries. I don't know if we would get the sensor readings. As long as it's safe, that's right. And I really agree also with Nkechi's view that you really have to be open and engage transparently, particularly with civil society and other groups that represent people. And the point you made, Mara, about technology-first approaches often failing. Look, we know technology provides massive benefits for people. And we know that in order to derive those benefits, they often require our data. And that data is used for personalization and for product design and delivering more efficient services, reducing air pollution, et cetera. But we've gotten that balance a bit wrong, because all technologies that are beneficial can also have unintended consequences. And when, for example, I'm a major Spotify user. I love Spotify. It's got me figured out. It's got me wired, knows what I want to hear before I even think about it. On the other hand, that same aggregation of data across lots of devices essentially creates a profile of you as a person that can be either used to empower you or disempower you, right? In the wrong hands, as we've discovered in the case of digital identity, without necessarily putting the safeguards in place, you're essentially empowering or shifting power from the individual to the state or to the issuer of that ID to surveil you and to know what you're doing. And I like people talk, okay, privacy, what's the big deal? We've been giving our data away for free forever. But, so I'm from Sudan, we just had a revolution, and if there's any reason to be celebrating the power of youth, there's another. So the youth led that revolution. But for societies that are insecure and governments that may not be legitimate, they may use that information to prevent people from gathering and speaking and connecting with each other in ways that would have maintained those states much longer than the people's will. So whenever those technologies that are introduced that could have a dual use, one has to think systematically about what are the ethical considerations or what are the potential harms that may result from that technology being introduced. So now, if you talk to people in the US or actually around the world, 58% of respondents to a survey agreed that the privacy threat is a crisis and we need to force companies to change. That's up from about 50%, and that online services are essential and we will have to accept some risk. That's gone down from about 46 to 38%. And I think the word crisis, privacy threat is a crisis. So what we've entered is this downward spiral where more and more personalization without necessarily the right checks and balances are creating a risk to the industry through distrust. It's not just creepiness that we're worried about. Why do I, if I think about something without even typing it, somehow 10 ads appear about it, right?
Right.
I'm exaggerating, but not that much. So it's beyond that. It's about potentially threatening how we would like to live our lives. And when you talk about smart cities, there's there's anonymized data from sensors that aren't really necessarily about us. But there's also lots of, for example, facial recognition technology that could monitor us for the intended benefit of security. But where is our agency? Where is our control? Where is our ability? If a policeman were to stop you in the street and say, give me your ID, and then also tell me where you went to have dinner and who your kids are and their ages and what kind of music you like and all that, you would of course say, you're nuts, show me your warrant. But if you have cameras that are linked to databases, all of that is happening without you having any control. Right. So when we introduce technologies, when we want to make cities smart and people-centric, you have to start with the people, consult with them, but design with people in mind, first and foremost. And that's agency, right? Control, privacy, security, transparency, leading to trust. If you don't have it, all right, we're entering, we're just continuing that downward spiral. This should be an upward spiral where we actually have technology that empowers us, that we engage in. And of course, there's going to be the need to reach out to communities that aren't going to be, like in digital ID, there are people who don't have fingerprints because they work too hard. And they might not have irises because they maybe have had an accident or been born that way. You have to solve those cases as well and reach out and have that conversation at the community level and provide alternatives, solve for those problems as well. Happy to engage further and looking forward to your questions.
Thank you. No, thank you very much. I think there's some real key insights there into how to think about these really questions that are governing our everyday lives now, and that we can all relate to. And I think some of those key principles that you've outlined, I would love to see adopted broadly.
Just a small aside, and I know I've gone too long, but so this question of surveillance capitalism, or you might have read that term or read the paper, is the same. It's the B side of this surveillance. So when we're talking about the potential for the state, we're also concerned about the potential of platform companies to do exactly the same thing. So when we're talking about principles of good ID or principles of beneficial technology, there could very well be, and I'm sure there already are, but there can be strengthened principles for smart cities that put people first.
Yeah. Mara, you wanted to react?
Well, yes, I absolutely agree with this. And in fact, Richard Sennett uses this metaphor that in the smart cities that we have nowadays, Romeo and Juliet would have never been able to fall in love with each other. and to me, this is a problem of paramount. It's a huge problem that we have, because in some cities, we have rolled out this technology infrastructure prior to setting the conditions under which the collected data can be used and who it can be used by. And cities are increasingly realizing, oh, wait, that contract that we signed with this sensor company 2 years ago, where is the data? And there's this little clause in the contract saying that you don't have access to the data. And then you find out companies are collecting this data and selling this data in the best Cambridge Analytica example. And obviously, you have to think, many of you I know are working in these groups to address these challenges, creating these solutions. And one of the key concerns that should be embedded into every technology solution is data governance. Now, for the past couple of years, we have been working on a number of projects so that we embed data governance into the design of data systems. And this is really hard to do. We're following co-creation strategies to bring people on board. And it's super interesting what happens, because people show up in the beginning, the first day of the community intervention, and they're like, what is the problem if people are collecting data about you? I have nothing to hide. And you're like, okay, I bet you change your mind as we start collecting data. So for example, in the case of the Decode project, what I worked with, this is a Barcelona project for data sovereignty, where we're looking how people could use blockchains to control the data they produce and donate this data to the government for better policy and so on. So we gave people environmental sensors, air quality, noise pollution, and so on. And they had to put these sensors at home. So initially, people thought this had nothing to do with their privacy. It's sensor data, and you put this sensor outside. First week goes by, and there comes this mother and says, can you take the sensor back? I just don't want it anymore. And I'm like, why you don't want it? And she said, well, because my children realize that I scream more than they do. Okay, second thing. Somebody realized his girlfriend, who was supposed to have quit smoking years ago, was smoking at night in the balcony every night, waking up and creeping out of bed to smoke because of the particles in the air. So we were measuring particles in the air. And so all of a sudden, people start to realize how sensors can say so much about their behaviors. I'm at home, I'm not at home, or somebody who had been traveling and lent his house to a friend. The friend had a massive party, and he could see it in the noise levels recorded that weekend. So people start to realize, and this is so important, when you do co-creation, people start to realize, and they want to have more agency over the decisions of how to share their data and how to control the data and how to share and not to share. So I think that as long as we keep on talking at this from the top down, it's so hard for people to make sense of it and want to take ownership. But if we start doing projects like she's doing and bringing people on board in the co-creation of technologies and so on, then we'll have more and more interesting engagements in this topic until the point people will say, like, when the police come and asks, who are your children, and so on, the same will be said about the use of digital technologies. People will want to have a say on how their data are used.
Yeah, thank you. No, certainly an unintended consequence when you get a sensor for one thing and discover something completely different. And Kechi, I'd like to just come to you. I know you've done a lot of work with on the capacity side. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what you've done in terms of helping local governments deal with this influx of data, influx of technology companies, and how they can manage this. And after we tackle this, I'll come to the audience. So please have your questions at the ready.
Yeah, thank you very much. Times are changing, right? Really, really fast, and so fast that some cities can cope with it. And the divide is quite wide. For some years now, just to backtrack for a bit, for 6 years I worked with a local subnational government in Africa, in Nigeria precisely, called Edo State Government. And the government had an initiative. They had something they wanted to do, which is to be more transparent and to engage citizens more in how they deliver their service. And so they went to the extent of having town hall meetings, which is something that is very much encouraged for a government that wants to be transparent, and participatory budgeting as well. So there were all these frameworks and policies that I wouldn't want to use the word copy and pasting, from other countries to see how they are doing it, taking up the different steps, which in its own stead can be a very good thing, because it's leading to more citizen engagement. So all the steps were being taken. The government was doing participatory budgeting, they were engaging citizens, engaging journalists, civil society, and everything seemed to be going on well, and they were beginning to release data, which was great. But at some point in time, the talk was, now that we've released the data, what next? It's great that we're doing open data. They launched the first subnational open data portal in Africa and in Nigeria. So now that we've released data, we've launched an open data portal, which was awesome. We were assisted by the World Bank then. It was great, but then there was no participation. So open data is said, and has been proven to drive economic development, job creation, increase economic activities. So there was an expectation that if we do this, citizens will engage more. we will attract more international recognition. We would attract more funding from the government side, and also we would get a better economy. But this was not so, you know. A lot of investment had gone into releasing data, and we didn't have that result. And then the question was, what could we do? Then we realized that, like we've all said, projects like these, and when you're talking about technology solutions, should be done in line with what citizens want. It should be people-centric, not just bringing in technology and bringing in ideas into the system. So the question was, what can we do to improve it? And one very huge challenge we found was the digital capacity was very low. Digital literacy within the system was very low amongst the people, the stakeholders that are expected to engage with this data. So now, training and retraining had to happen, capacity building had to happen, and then data was being released, investment had gone in, and tracked back over time, we saw that the project died down. You know, there was no impact. It was a beautiful project, but there was no impact because an approach had been taken, not taken into cognizance the people we are creating this platform for, you know. And then over time, in course of my work, we started engaging with journalists. So I moved over to Code for Africa, and we're engaging with journalists, doing data journalism, working with civil society, talking to them about improving their data capacity, leveraging data, leveraging official statistics to do better advocacy. And we were training them and training journalists, you know, doing all the capacity building, data journalism, creating visualization, data science, analysis. And then at some point, we got a very funny question from the community. Fine, we have all the skills, but we don't have the data to use the skill on. We are reaching out to the Bureau of Statistics. The data is in a format we can access. We have to sign in. There were all these restrictions. And then we had, this was at a national level, and then we had an opposite effect. Now, the data was there to some extent, but it wasn't updated, it wasn't timely, it wasn't accessible, it wasn't in the right formats. And then we had a pool of over 1,200 journalists and civil society in the community who were looking for data to, you know, do better advocacy. And then we approached the National Bureau of Statistics Nigeria, and then we told them, oh, we have this beautiful community, we have this awesome group of youths who are very keen to engage with your platform. Can you come in and help them engage? But rather, what we found was, they were wondering, we found out that within government was a digital capacity divide as well. You know, we had very few people, say in an organization of over 100, this is an example, you find that only 5 people are working on this digital revolution. So the organization or the government agency itself has not been revolutionized by technology. So how then can you talk to people? How then can you provide and give out data and information the way citizens want? So we found that problem, and then that's how we founded the GovTech program of Code for Africa. And then we realized that it's not just about saying government release data, be more transparent, we want smart cities, we want better service delivery, we want this platform developed. The people who we were depending on to do this actually had a skill gap. Yep. They didn't understand why they should do what we are wanting them to do. And so we changed our approach and started working with the government. We signed an MOU, we reached out to partners, and then we started training the Bureau to release data the way citizens want the data to be released. And then to train them to be able to speak to journalists to understand all the jargons, the different KPIs to measure in different sectors, you know. So what I'm saying is, while we are calling for this revolution, while we are engaging the government, we should also realize that there's some internal challenges that exist. We haven't even gone to the part of corruption. We haven't even gotten to the part of the lack of trust. And it was very great in the speech by the guy from MasterCard. There was a question about trust, right? And you talked about it, building trust. So over time, people are not trusting the system. They don't even understand. People are not trusting the system because they can't see an impact coming out of it. So while we are crying for growth, while we are crying for development, while we as youths are reaching out and campaigning, we want this and that, it's also important for us to go to these partners and find out what are the challenges, what is really happening, how can I help you serve me better, right? Because smart city is 2 ways. Simply probably the private sector and the government trying to make our lives better. And how would they make our lives better without talking to us, without finding out what we need, you know? So sometimes it's also great for us to go over to those organizations, try to engage, create a partnership, and even as civil society, don't be on the negative end all the time. Don't see yourself as, you know, the voice in the wilderness, to borrow a scripture from the Bible. Don't just see yourself crying over, but go over there to find out what is going on, how can we help you, and you'll be shocked what you find out. So to summarize, so when we got in there, we found out that we needed to support the National Bureau of Statistics to understand how to give data to the public in the way we wanted. And it's been very great. We've been able to develop a data desk. We found out that they needed to build their capacity to visualize data, to tell stories with data, to the different formats that exist, about open data licenses, you know, and using restriction to access to data. And it's been great, and we're all growing. And the success of this project now, the government of Senegal is interested in partnering with Code for Africa, for example, to see how we can replicate, and other local states in Nigeria precisely are asking for ways in which we can empower the national statistics offices to communicate with the public better. So.
Yeah. That's great.
There's a lot of work to be done, and you know, little by
sharing.
little, we'll get somewhere.
No, there's so many great lessons learned in the work you've been doing, and I'm not surprised at all to hear that there's interest from other local governments and other cities to replicate this, as it seems like it's a really key theme, and there are so many things we could touch on, and we may run out of time. It's such a rich discussion and broad topic. Are there any questions from the room for our panelists? I think there are some mics here, so maybe if you are able to line up at the mics, we have about 5 minutes, so we should be able to take a few.
Hello, my name is Samatar Ibrahim. I'm from Somalia by way of Australia. I work with a research group at Swinburne University in Australia creating digital identity for Somalia. So I guess my question is, how do you address such a thing in a country like Somalia where there are such serious security concerns? And how would you go about implementing it in such a country? Thank you.
Maybe we can take 2 or 3 and then come to the...
Hello, my name is Suleyma Zalk. I'm from Lebanon and I'm a student. I just have 2 main questions. I want to touch upon what Mara said. You guys collected data from consumer behavior, right? So we did not go and ask the people what they were doing. You were able to find value by analyzing their behavior, right? The sensors, when you put the sensors, you're able to find out behavior of individuals, right? Yeah, their behavior. And which is something different from when you would go and ask them, because it's most likely they're not going to say the same answer. There's a lot of things that they don't realize about themselves. So that's where you find value. It's in the consumer behavior where they don't know about. So for me, it's safe to say that in this case, to have a people-first approach or a people-centric technological advancement, I collect data from people. So technology advancement is fueled by data. Do you believe that it would hinder, putting privacy restrictions and data restrictions would hinder the technological advancement? Since we find value in these for a people-first approach, since we find values in those kind of consumer behavior, unconscious or subconscious behavior. And my other question would be, you talked about Nigeria, and there's something very interesting about Nigeria and in general emerging markets, where there is very rapid growth and there's a gap between the individuals. And we can see this because like Nigeria has the highest GDP in Africa, but one of the lowest GDP per capita because families are still big. So if I were to look at a country right now, especially in the emerging markets, where there is a gap between the knowledge, the literacy, the digital literacy, and the technological advancement, without having to start from zero, how would I address this problem through bridging the gap? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take one more and then I'll come to the panel.
All right. Hi, my name is Angelo. I'm from Indonesia. I'm working with the World Bank country office in Jakarta. I think by now it's clear that a people-centered design requires a lot of data. so that, for example, if a city wants to work better, then it needs more data to improve itself in its services. So in Jakarta, or in Southeast Asia in general, we have tech companies like Grab or Gojek, and they have this super app where they provide a lot of services. And by providing those services, they collect data to improve their services. But then I don't see any government agency or any government bodies that have done this kind of approach. So my question would be in a region as dynamic as Southeast Asia, how can governments strategize to collect more data so that they can improve their services to their citizens? Thank you.
Thank you. So perhaps, Magdi, would you like to speak to the first point more around digital ID? And then perhaps, Mara, there's the question on privacy, whether privacy restrictions can impede value of data, and perhaps this last question as well on kind of government agencies. And then Nkechi, if you could touch on the question around technological gap.
Okay, sure. So Samatar's question on Somalia. Well, the World Bank actually is doing a digital ID project in Somalia. I believe one of the first things that happened also was a data protection and privacy law. The World Bank is doing good work on this topic and is focused on the right principles. I believe that, so I just want to touch on it. So I didn't expand a lot on that, but is certainly a question of institutional quality and the capability of institutions to provide protections. But it's the same question if technologies are getting ahead of the ability to regulate them, if the institutions aren't also built up to the extent that they can provide people with protections, then I'd think very carefully about whether or not one should be thinking about introducing things like smart cities. So institutional quality is very important, investing heavily on the ability of both governments and civil society. But I do want to touch on this consumer behavior question really quickly. I think it's true that capturing data on consumer behavior, but other data on consumers does have the possibility of advancing service delivery, but it's the same behavioral approach to sort of the behavioral science that led to applications that also cause addiction, that manipulate people, that manipulate their votes, and that lead to bad consequences in elections, et cetera. So yes, there is a cost. One can't be completely absent about, I talked about Spotify. We're investing in a technology company that allows personalization on device rather than centrally. So there's a marginal additional investment required to do that as opposed to just using the existing technology, but that allows it to be trusted in the long run. We believe that's more valuable in the long run.
Thank you.
Okay, so innovation in general cannot happen at any cost. This is very important. Good innovation will come up, and in any context, will survive this whatever limitation, but our privacy, the risk of putting our privacy at stake can have horrible results. It can endanger our democracies, our autonomy, and so on. Technology innovation cannot come at any cost. So privacy first, and then technology. It is true that sometimes by having deployed an innovative technology, you may find out things that you did not expect from, I couldn't find you, now I see. It is true that sometimes you will deploy a technology, and in the process of doing so, you will identify things that you didn't expect, privacy breaches or things like that. And this is why co-creation and experimentation are so important. The way I work is I'm not collecting data prior to people's engagement. I work with people in the co-design of technology so that through their participation, we can gain insights on how to improve that technology. So I think that it is super important that we create safe environments in which we can deploy innovative technologies and see what happens. As we call this experimentation in the wild, and we do it with people. And the second thing is, concerning this experimentation in the wild approaches, this is super important for GovTech, because obviously governments want to innovate, but they have they're liable for a lot of things. It's not easy for a government to deploy a new technology at scale, and then let's see what happens in terms of privacy or security. So there's this really interesting document by NESTA, the National Endowment for Science and Technology of the UK, where it calls for the need for governments to experiment technologies in kind of like pilot fields. I do believe that this is super important. We need governments to innovate, to cope with people. I mean, people are so ahead of governments in many cases, but at the same time, we need them to do this in a safe environment with people. So I call for the need of more experimentation with people and within the boundaries of a controlled pilot experience.
Yeah.
Try to answer two in one.
Well, yes, thank you.
Thank you for that beautiful question. There's a very huge challenge when you look at emerging markets or emerging economies trying to quickly adapt technology solutions. So there's a lot of pressure in the world, the fourth industrial revolution, what is the future of work, and then you find a developing country whose problem is just broadband, as simple as having a 3G network and not even fiber optics, right? So you find that these countries, we have an opportunity to grow rapidly, you know? But the kind of challenges you see that exist, for example, is this. I was reading a report, I don't remember who wrote the report now, and they were ranking the educational system of countries in Africa. And then the educational system of Nigeria was ranked 2 out of 7. I can't really explain what the ranking system was, but it was pretty low, and out of an average of 3.8. You know? And so the question is, while we are thinking about technology, the very huge skill gap you talked about, Africa and Nigeria precisely, which is a population of over 200 million people, we have over 170 million people who have mobile access out of the population. So that's a very huge number. And I think we have about over 30 million people with access to smartphones, right? So the question becomes, if you have people who have access to digital devices, why then is the digital skill gap very low? And then it's a holistic thing. So you take a look at the educational system, for example, and then you find out that the people who we're expecting to come in and do the transformation are not able to, when they come into the system to help do the transformation, or to create those technology innovations and solutions, or to utilize whatever innovation the government is putting out to us, they find it difficult and it's unsustainable. You know? And then the question is what kind, you see a very huge skill gap. The unemployment rate in Nigeria, for example, is over 23%. And we have a youthful population, above 50% of Nigerian population is, they are youths rather, right? They are among the youthful population. So the question becomes, if you have this, I would like to call it human capital resource locally, right? Why is it difficult? And then I was reading a recent World Bank report on Nigeria economy, and the key things in there are, if you have to grow or adapt this technology, it was a digital report, you have to think about education. The question is, why are these people not coming out and getting jobs? Because if you don't train people for the future of what we see, or we expect, means they're going to come out of school and then they don't have jobs to get into. We keep having experts coming into the country to do things. So in Nigeria, for example, government job is not seen as a very profitable thing. It's not something to aspire to. You don't aspire to a government job in Africa. Like, it's sacrifice for you to work in there. If you have to work in there and make progress, it means you're people-centered, right? You're driven by impact. You know, and people even tell you, why are you here? So you see these youths who are coming out, a country of over 200 million people, with over 50% of its population being youth, so you have 100 million people, this is an example, who have an opportunity to transform the system, but yet that is not happening. Oh, sorry, this is question and answer, right? I see your face. I'm sorry, I can just keep talking more about this. So it's
a very good
It's
discussion.
a serious issue, and it's what I'm trying to say in summary. It's not just about technology. It's also about a different ecosystem, different aspects, poverty, unemployment, education, that all come together to determine if a country can be prosperous or not.
No, you're quite right, and it's not an easy question to even answer in a few minutes. So well done. I'm so sorry because we're out of time. In fact, I've already run over a little bit, so it's I'm to blame for that. So sorry for the people who are still waiting to ask questions. You may be able to grab the panelists for 5-10 minutes right after this session if they have a few minutes. But I'm afraid we'll have to stop the plenary discussion there. It's such a rich topic. Thank you so much for your inputs today. Thank you for the good questions that we were able to get to. And I hope everybody's taken away a few thoughts about what each of us can do wherever we live in our own cities to make them more inclusive and improve their services. Perfect way to wrap up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, moderator.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, panelists, and thank you all for your questions. Just a couple of quick announcements before you head into lunch. So we do have the Youth Summit Innovation Marketplace that's opening in a few minutes. You're going to see an exciting array of people and opportunities, so definitely go check it out. And we'll use the Innovation Passport to make sure you visit all the booths and collect stamps. And there will be a prize waiting for those of you who visit all the booths and get a stamp from them. As you will notice, our next agenda item is the Case Challenge session at exactly 1 p.m. Please be in the same rooms you were in this morning. And if you're not sure how to get there, just come back here and we'll direct you. Finally, I have a favor to ask you guys. This is less for the online audience and more for you. If you can just look into your bags real quick and see if you've taken one of the laptops from the Case Challenge by mistake. It's okay, no need to be embarrassed. If you've taken it, no problem. Just come and drop it off here. These are World Bank laptops, so we're answerable to them. So just look in your bags right now, and then I won't stand between you and food. Thank you.